Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. In ancient Rome, trials were held in the forum. So forensic science is any science presented as evidence in court. This evidence can be as microscopic as DNA or as large as Exhibit A, the family van. For late-night drivers, it is another roadside reminder of the fragility of life. His wailing drowns out the ambulance sirens. The woman is loaded into an ambulance and rushed to a nearby hospital. But everyone knows it's already too late. A coroner, new on the job, arrives around 2 a.m.
When I arrived in the emergency department, the place was fairly hectic, as many emergency departments are. But I focused my attention on the examination of the body of the deceased person, which is my responsibility as a coroner. And I determined that she had a number of injuries around her face and neck area. She had some bruising in other parts of her body, all of which seemed to be consistent with being involved in a fatal motor vehicle accident.
Because the victim carries no identification, the body is tagged as Jane Doe and sent to the hospital morgue until funeral arrangements can be made. Upstairs, staff try to find out the victim's identity from the driver. But he's agitated and distraught and speaks little English. Eventually, they calm him enough to find out his name is Alberto Perez. The victim is Beatrice Perez, his wife. An officer is dispatched to tell Beatrice's eldest child, Katerina, about her mother's death. Alberto was kept in the hospital overnight to check out a neck injury. The coroner inquires about the cause of the accident. Alberto says that he and Beatrice worked nights cleaning banks and office buildings. They were coming home late from a job, and Beatrice had fallen asleep in the middle seat. Shortly after midnight, something woke her up, and in her groggy confusion, she thought they were going to rear-end the car just ahead of them. Beatrice screamed and grabbed his right arm, causing him to lose control and crash through a fence. Her body bounced around, into the front seat, into him, and then into the back. When he realized what had happened, he claimed his mind snapped. The ambulance arrived first and took Beatrice. Then police arrived. They conclude that Beatrice probably wasn't wearing a seatbelt and that she had probably been struck by a loose spare tire or tire iron in the back of the van. The coroner fumbles for comforting words. Meanwhile, Katerina has been told that they don't perform autopsies on passengers in traffic fatalities. She makes an appointment to see the coroner. She explains that Alberto had threatened to kill her mother more than once. Alberto is actually her stepfather, and that he and her mother each had offspring from their first marriages. They'd been married 3 years ago in Uruguay, and they had a son, Luis. They'd always argued, but after coming to Canada, it got worse. Alberto was given to jealous outbursts. Her mother's way of dealing with him was to walk away. Soon it got so bad, they started eating separately and sleeping in separate rooms. But Alberto would demand sex and threatened to take away Luis if Beatrice refused him. One day, a family friend, knowing Beatrice had an interest in meditation, introduced her to Hector. A spiritual bond developed. Alberto knew about Hector and hassled her that Hector was more than just a friend. A month ago, Alberto went to Hector's and warned him to stay away from Beatrice. When Alberto came home, he bragged he had just killed Hector. Beatrice knew it wasn't true because Hector had just called. But Alberto's cruelty convinced her it was time to move out. The night of the accident, they'd been officially separated for 5 days. Katerina didn't trust Alberto. Maybe he had purposely rammed the van into the fence to kill her. That was why she wanted the autopsy.
Given their concerns, I had no difficulty at all in saying, fine, let's arrange an autopsy so that we can come to some more firm conclusions about what had happened, other than what I've concluded from my initial examination, and we arranged for an autopsy to be done the next morning.
The hospital pathologist carried out a complete autopsy.
At the conclusion, he called me up to indicate that his findings were that she had died of injuries that she had sustained to the head and neck area, and specifically that she had a fracture high in her neck that in fact had crushed her spinal cord.
In short, the autopsy confirms that Beatrice died from severe head injuries as a result of the traffic accident. But fate was about to intervene, not once, but twice. The coroner, Bill Lucas, called Katerina and told her about the autopsy. She and her siblings were happier now that they understood that their mother's death was just an accident. And Katerina expressed a wish that her mother be cremated. But there'd been a glitch with her mother's death certificate. The funeral home couldn't accept the body while it still read Jane Doe, so a death certificate is prepared in the name of Beatrice Perez. To Katerina, this is worse. She doesn't want her mother buried with her married name.
It turned out that the family wanted her maiden name on the death certificate, so I spoke to a funeral director, asked him if it would be appropriate if we just put her maiden name in brackets after her married name, and he felt that that was reasonable. It turned out that that was not reasonable in the eyes of the family, so that caused a delay of a further day before we could make arrangements to meet with the family and have it altered to their satisfaction.
The delay was to prove strangely fortuitous. A civilian with the Federal Department of Transportation had just finished a course in blood splattering. An officer asked her opinion about the van.
Constable Robertson had been at the scene and was really bothered by the injuries suffered by the female party who had died. He couldn't quite understand what happened or why she had died given the severity or lack of severity involved in the collision. So he asked me to take a look at it and see if I had anything to offer. When I opened the vehicle, Right away, it was very, very evident that there was a tremendous amount of blood. I got this horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach that I knew it was a murder. So it was kind of frightening for me as a civilian, saying this is a homicide and watching the wheels, all the big guns come out.
Despite the fact that as a civilian, her testimony wouldn't be accepted in court, the investigation followed her lead.
Because of the concerns that were raised, I indicated to the family when I met with them that we had some questions that remained unanswered that needed investigation, and that the cremation would be delayed as a result of those, and they were quite happy to accept that information.
The body was just about to enter the crematorium oven when officers arrived.
She was being pushed into the oven to be cremated, and we were able to salvage that. If she had been cremated, the evidence would have been lost.
Meanwhile, a forensic engineer is called into the case.
I use mathematics routinely in accident reconstruction, and that gives me an insight into what to expect in accidents, what types of curvatures are normal and what types of curvatures are not. In this case, I did do some calculations to see how fast the vehicle would be going in this final curve as it swung back onto the roadway.
Using physics, he attempts to reconstruct exactly what had happened during the accident.
The path of the vehicle was across the grass through a shallow ditch, at which point it turned around, went back onto the grass. As it went into the service road, it pushed its way through a chain link fence, knocked down some fence posts, drove along the service road for a short distance, and then turned back into the chain link fence and stopped. The vehicle stayed on the ground. It didn't ramp off an edge of a roadway or a ditch. It just drove along through the grass. Didn't jump, it didn't roll, it didn't get sideways and roll over. It just drove along. That's all there was an indication of. No trajectories through the air, no excessive yawing, which is rotation of the vehicle sideways. Not even hard steering, really.
From analyzing the drawings, the photographs, and the vehicle itself, he concludes.
There's no way that the vehicle movements could have caused the occupant to get thrown around the vehicle in the manner that it was alleged, leaving blood all over the vehicle from this accident.
This time, the body is sent to the coroner's office downtown to be autopsied by a forensic pathologist.
Obviously, whether this is a homicide, accident, or suicide, a determination needs to be made as to what category this falls into. There was bruising over the 5th and 6th vertebra or bone in the neck. The spine was intact. There was not a fracture in the neck as suspected at an earlier stage. The injuries I noted on the side of her chin are most likely an indication of her effort to get somebody's hands off her neck and have been self-inflicted in a defensive fashion. In a case such as this case, the findings are written on the body, and what's happened to this body is clearly evident. She suffered a severe beating, which wasn't the result of a car accident, and she's been strangled to death.
So Katerina was right. This was no accident. Her mother had been murdered. A blood-splattering expert from the Center of Forensic Sciences is brought into the case.
There was blood staining on the driver's seat, on the seat itself, on the backrest, on the driver's door, in the area where the driver's feet would be. You can clearly see that there are actually several stains. Here, there are 2 here, various locations on the seat. If someone is sitting in the driver's seat and there's blood moving through the air, it's going to land on the person, not the areas that are masked or hidden by the body. So Blood staining on the driver's seat means no one was sitting in the driver's seat. This supposedly happened while they were driving down a major highway. Where was the driver, levitating in the air? It's just not possible.
A close inspection of the stains also reveals something else.
If someone was sitting on those stains, they already had to be dry. So the stains on the driver's seat, at least, could not have gotten there at the time the accident occurred. Because if someone was sitting in wet blood, I would have expected the stains to smear.
Putting together Katerina's account of her mother's last night and the scientist's findings, this is what the investigators think happened. Beatrice and Alberto have only been officially separated for 5 days on the night in question.
All of the evidence shows the weeks following a separation, especially with a volatile marriage and abusive type of relationship, that's a very, very dangerous time.
Beatrice called Hector from work that night and told him she'd had it with Alberto. She didn't want to work with him anymore, and she was tired of having to keep her relationship with Hector a secret. If Alberto wanted to know if Hector was her lover, she'd tell him. She hung up after telling Hector she'd see him within the hour and that she couldn't wait. Then she called home. She asked Katerina about Luis and said she'd see her daughter in the morning. Shortly after 11, they were packing up the van.
The beating started outside the van, outside a business that they were working at. And she was thrown inside the van. And there was not one spot on the whole interior of this vehicle that didn't have blood on it. She tried to get away from him. She fought for her life. She went right into the front. There's into this front area here, fighting, and there was quite a bit of blood dripping down onto the floor. There's blood being thrown all around. And so she's moved quite a bit. There's smearing here. She's come into this seat, and there's, in this area, she was severely beaten. She's crawled over the back seat into the rear area here, where this is tremendously blood-soaked. You can see the hair pattern here. This is where she finally died. The poor woman must have been terrified. She was fighting for her life, and she was a very small woman. He was quite a bit bigger than her. And she fought for her life, and she lost.
But Alberto had no intention of being caught. He wiped the blood off the van windows so it wouldn't be noticed by passing vehicles. Then he drove and drove, looking for a place to stage an accident. John Mustard's calculations suggest that Alberto actually drove the van off the road and through the fence slowly, so that it would look like a horrendous accident. The kind that would have killed an occupant, but wouldn't have been actually dangerous to him. He wanted to get away with murder without getting hurt. Then he removed Beatrice's body from the vehicle and waited for the emergency crews. Alberto Perez was arrested and charged with murder. At his pretrial, Alberto Perez's defense was that Beatrice provoked and taunted him with news that Hector was her lover. Alberto claimed that she spat in his face and insisted that he drive her to Hector's house. The prosecution's case was weakened on several accounts. The coroner hadn't attended the accident scene. Evidence had not been carefully gathered, and even the minivan, Exhibit A, had not been seized and sealed on site.
It's one of those cases where if anything goes wrong, everything went wrong. And you wouldn't expect that, but somewhere along the line it happens. And because of the lack of communication, this man literally almost got away with murder.
As a result, defense was able to plea bargain, and Alberto Perez's charge was reduced from murder to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 8 years, served 3, and deported. The sentence infuriated Katerina as well as many women's groups. If there is any solace in this ugly death, it is that now coroners attend and investigate all traffic fatalities involving couples.
We've also been educated through this experience, and unfortunately many others, about a circumstance that we refer to as intimate femicide. And this is the murder of a spouse by their intimate partner. Unfortunately, in the vast majority of circumstances, it tends to be the female who is the victim, and quite often it is in circumstances that were very similar to this case, where there has been a recent separation or a pending separation, a very possessive male partner who is basically enraged by the fact that the relationship has or is about to terminate.
Without a daughter's devotion, a keen-eyed civilian, and a team of dedicated forensic experts, this traffic fatality would never have been revealed to be a brutal murder. The stories in Exhibit A are based on actual cases.